This video is going to cover the creation of a simplified CAD model for the stool in Fusion 360. The first thing we want to do is create a new document. Then we will go Create Sketch and choose the side plane. The next thing we're going to do is begin drawing the leg, which is the first part of the stool that we're going to create. Before we do that, we want to actually draw a line down the middle, which is going to form our mirror plane. And we want to set this as a construction line. Next, we are going to draw a singular line and then dimension it. So I'm going to draw a line. It doesn't matter how long it is, even if it's 100 millimeters long now or 10 centimeters long when it needs to be 66 centimeters long. We're going to be using the sketch dimension tool to actually change the length of that, and that will automatically update it to the correct length that we enter. So you want to make sure that you actually turn construction lines back off because you want this to be a real line. A construction line is essentially a line that is used to aid in drafting or mirroring or laying things out. It won't actually become a line or a feature on the final sketch when we actually choose to extrude it. By using a construction line, that allows us to actually leave those lines in place rather than deleting them, allowing us to quickly change features and dimensions later without the risk of the parts moving around. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click Sketch Dimension on this line, and you want to make sure that you're actually setting the dimension of the length. So I'm going to type in 660 millimeters and click Enter, and you'll see obviously this line gets quite a bit longer. And now if we wanted, we could actually stretch out our construction line. So this line here didn't ever have a sketch dimension applied to it, which is why it's so easy to change the length of. Now what we're going to do is we're going to draw another line across the top, which is going to allow us to set the angle of this line here, which is later going to form the angle of the leg of the stool. To do that, I'm going to set the angle of this part. I'm going to constrain that to be 90 degrees and click OK. And now I'm going to click this line here and this line here, and I'm going to set this angle as 81 degrees. Now I'm going to select the bottom of the line and this area here and type in 210 millimeters. As we can see here, that is allowing us to create a chair leg of the correct length and the correct angle. Now what we're going to do is we're going to be drawing the remainder of the pine profile. We could use the offset tool for this, but it is also simpler to simply draw the lines and use the sketch dimension. So I'm going to first draw two lines. Doesn't matter how long they are, around 40 or 42 millimeters is fine, and click Enter. Then I'm going to draw another line which is connecting the top and bottom. And you'll see the shape now goes a shade of blue. That means that it's an enclosed object that could be extruded or cut or revolved. So I'm going to select the corner here and the edge and type in 42 millimeters. And I'll also do this at the bottom as well and type in 42 millimeters. So I'm going to click Create Mirror. And I'm going to select all of these lines here and click Mirror Line and click on our construction line that we added earlier. Click OK and click Solid Extrude. Select both of these profiles and set the distance as 42 millimeters. Importantly, over in the operations section, I'm going to change it from new body to new component and click OK. Next, we're going to be creating the recess for the rebate joint on both legs at once. So using the 2-point rectangle tool, I'm going to simply draw a rectangle like so, which at least covers all of the leg profile, and enter the dimension on one side of 55 millimeters. And now I can click solid extrude and select cut, and I can actually drag this down. And so this rebate joint is going to be comprising the 42 by 42 millimeter leg, along with the 70 by 19 millimeter that is making the top of the stool. So this rebate joint actually needs to be 19 millimeters deep. So minus 19, click enter. And once you're up to this step, it will be a good idea to actually go File, Save, to make sure that you store your progress. So next, I'm going to be creating a sketch on the rebate joint of one of the legs. To do this, I'm going to first begin with a 2-point rectangle. I'm starting with a rectangle to show you that it's important that the top of the stool actually fits within the size of the timber that we have. So our timber is 70 by 19 millimeters. So although there's some flexibility in the design to accommodate a range of designs, it is going to be important that your your piece is no higher than 70 millimeters. Additionally, we have some slats made of spotted gum for the seat, which are 80 by 18 millimeters, which are dressed all round. And so it's going to be important that for the edge section, it's going to be important that is just around or a little bit over 80 millimeters so that those slats can actually fit on there properly. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line starting at the edge of the leg that goes 10 millimeters. Then I'm going to draw another line which meets up with the end of the rectangle. Now, we've set the height of this to be 70 millimeters, but we are yet to set the length, so that will change when we begin adding sketch dimensions. So I'm going to set this as 80 millimeters. And I'm going to take the opportunity to now also draw a construction line down the center. So to activate the construction line, you can also use a keyboard shortcut, which is the letter X. As you can see, I'm pressing X now and it's toggling off and on the construction lines. So I'm going to press X to turn construction lines on before I draw this line. Down the bottom here, I'm also going to add a chamfer. So I'm going to click Modify, Chamfer, and click Equal Distance Chamfer. And I'm going to use a chamfer of 27.5 millimeters for aesthetic purposes, as it is half of the height of the rebate joint, and click Enter. Now I'm going to use the Trim tool to actually remove some of these unnecessary lines here. and then draw a line all the way up across the rebate joint to our construction line that we've selected. Just make sure to actually toggle construction lines back off when you draw this line. And click trim. And I'm actually going to leave this line here and set this as a construction line because that is helpful for us to visualize where our material is. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click create mirror. I'm going to select these lines here. I'm going to mirror around this construction line here and click OK. And now I can then go solid extrude, making sure all of these lines are selected. I can change this to a new component and I can set the distance as 19 millimeters, which is the height of our timber. And so now we have done almost half of the stool because we'll then be able to mirror this back over itself. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the bottom frame support, or essentially what would be the footrest of the stool. First thing that we're going to be doing to do the cross beam or the footrest of the stool is we'll click sketch, select one of the legs, and we're going to be pressing X to turn on construction lines, and we're going to be drawing a little line which we're going to be using to mirror, and we'll press enter. Then we're going to be pressing the X button again to actually turn off construction lines. And we're going to draw two lines. Then we're going to set the dimension of the bottom line to be 140 millimeters from the bottom. We're going to set the distance between these two lines to be 17 millimeters, which is the size of our material. Then we're also going to draw a line to join up the shape. Now, this component would normally have a tenon joint to actually join it to the legs, but that won't be covered in this video. So then we're going to click create, mirror. I'm going to select these three lines, select our mirror line, and click OK. And now you can see that we've actually created this profile. And so now I'm going to click solid extrude on this component. As you can see here, currently it's being extruded from the sketch surface. We actually want it to be beginning at an offset. So we'll click start offset, and we're going to enter that offset as 42 minus 19 divided by 2. So essentially the offset would be 11.5 millimeters. And if I set this distance to be 19, we can see that it's nicely located in the middle of the two components. And we can click new component rather than join and click OK. And now it has actually added that component in at the correct distance. Now that we've created half of the stool, we're going to be creating what's called an offset plane, which is going to allow us to mirror. So let's select the YZ plane, right click and select offset plane, and we're going to set that offset plane as minus 108 millimeters. Once we've created the offset plane, we can click create mirror, and let's change the type to components. Select all of the components that we've already made. and select our offset plane as the mirror plane and click OK. So just to check, we can use the Inspect Measure tool to actually check the distance between the opposing legs, and it should be 216 millimeters, which it is. So we've done the right thing, which is great. So the next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding our slats. So with these slats, we're going to draw them in place like we've been doing previously. So now we're going to be adding the slats of the seat. So we're going to click Create Sketch and select the seat base or the seat top, and we can start creating our lines. And we can use the Sketch Dimension tool to set this as 18 millimeters. Draw another line. Again, look out for that little square, which means that it's a right angle or 90 degrees. $80 millimeters, click enter, draw another line, draw another line across here. Perfect. So let's quickly measure the length across here. So we've got 240 millimeters, which isn't quite enough to have three 80 millimeters wide slats along here. So we're going to have to go with two slats. So let's actually draw our two slats just so we can get an idea of what it's going to look like. Obviously it needs to have a gap to fill up the space, but you don't want the gap to be too big, otherwise it might be a little bit uncomfortable. In fact, for this chair it might be better to actually cut some of the material down and have less gaps. It's a little bit substantial, this gap at the moment, but that's okay. Again, there's some room for flexibility within the design and for you to be able to change it to be the way that you want. So I'm going to draw a construction line from the middle upwards, which is going to be used for mirroring these slats later on. And I'm going to set this distance to be about 16 millimeters. I'm going to delete the other one because I've finished with this one now. It was purely just for visualization. And now what I can do is I can click Create Mirror, select these two, select the mirror line, and click OK. Yeah, that is a fairly large gap, but that should be okay. And let's select Extrude and make sure that you've got New Component selected. So it's possible that you may want the slats to slightly overhang the stool, and it's fairly easy to do that. You can use the offset extrusion tool that we used before to make the bottom brace. But for now, let's leave these slats as 300 millimeters and click OK. So now we have our slats on the top of our stool, and there's just one last part we need to do, which is the pieces which actually join the two halves of the stool together. So those are actually made from the same 70 by 19 millimeter pine. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a sketch on the side of one of these legs now. So essentially the entire sketch is on a bit of an angle. And so this width is 216 millimeters. And the height is 70 millimeters. And this time the distance from the bottom to the top of that piece is 100 millimeters. And so now we can click solid extrude. And if you look, we're actually extruding this one on a bit of an angle. But again, we don't want this to be at the edge. We're not going to be using a rebate or a housing joint for this. This will actually be a tenon joint. So instead, I'm going to set this as offset. I'm going to add a offset of 11.5 millimeters and set the material thickness as 19 millimeters. And as before, you may need to make that negative in order for the offset to go in the correct way. And I'm going to click new component and OK. So finally, all I'm going to do is click create mirror. I'm going to mirror this last component around the center, and I can use the XY plane for this. I don't need to create an offset plane. So I can click OK. And now we have the completed stool modeled, or fairly simple. I haven't used any tenon joints, I haven't used any dowels, anything like that. Just fairly simple tools. And a future video will show you how to use the tenons if you want.